Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining us this afternoon, this evening, or this morning, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to the Global Out-of-Home Insights 2022 webinar, kindly put together by Broadsign. Season's greetings, I should say, to all of you. We have a great panel with us today. I'll introduce them in a few seconds, and I'll ask them to introduce themselves. We're here to answer your questions. We've got a few things we want to talk about. We'll be talking about sustainability. We'll be talking about climate change. We'll be talking about content. We'll be talking about some of the trends for next year. But above all, we're here to answer your questions. And we know that good webinars are interactive. So there's a Q&A box as part of the Zoom webinar package, which we ask you to use. And pretty much as soon as you ask questions and I can fit them in, we'll get straight back to you. We won't be leaving them to the end of the hour. So without further ado, let me introduce the panelists. We've got Fiona, Autumn, and Adam. They're going to start their video streams now, and one by one, they can introduce themselves. Fiona, you were first. That's a lovely colour, Fiona, you're in. Yeah.
Thank you so much. It's actually black, but hey ho. Hello, everybody. My name's Fiona FitzGibbon. I have an agency, Diversiffi Media. We are a commercialization agency working with landlords, asset owners, media owners, looking at contracts and developing their digital out-of-home networks. I'm also a partner in the out-of-home media consultancy, which on the bigger scale, we look after mergers and acquisitions in the out-of-home sector, as well as contracts with the key global landowners and media owners.
Autumn.
Hi, I'm Autumn White, and I am the EVP of Digital and Managing Partner at Verizon Media. I've been here for about 4 years, and I think if you were to ask me last year if I would be on a panel about out of home this year, I would have been like, no, that doesn't really make sense. But because of everything that's been changing in the space and the more digital we're putting into out of home, here I am. Excited to talk about it.
Brilliant. Thank you, Autumn, and thanks for seeing us again. We're only with you a couple of weeks ago in LA.
That's right.
Time is flying quickly past. Oh, quickly forward, past or forward. And Adam is looking very seasonal. I hope something's going on at Broadsign today. Otherwise, maybe that's his normal dress for the month of December.
No, this is just my standard Thursday shirt, actually. We had our Christmas all hands right before this. So my name is Adam Green. I'm the SVP of Strategy, Partnerships, and Corporate Development here at Broadsign. So I have a pretty wide remit covering what we do as a company and where we go in the future.
Brilliant. Thanks, Adam. And it's good to see you again. Adam, of course, joined from Google. 2 or 3 years ago, did you join Broadsign from Google?
It's actually 4.5 years ago.
Wow.
Time really is marching by, or that past, or whatever.
Yeah, I would. Well, we forget 2 years of COVID. COVID didn't exist. We're all 2 years younger.
That's true. Just truncated out of there. Good.
Okay. Well, the first question we've had from an audience member was, are we recording this and are we going to send it out to attendees after we finish? If you're an attendee and you're going to stay to the end, the answer is no. If you're going to leave halfway through, the answer is yes. We are recording it. We want you to stay to the end. We want to ask you to ask questions. But yes, it is being recorded, and we will send it out in a probably after Christmas now. Okay. One of the things that we have sort of prepped for you a little bit is what vertical sectors the panelists think are hot. So actually, starting with Adam, as I beat him up on his jumper. Adam, what vertical sectors are you seeing are hot this year and will trend into next year as well, do you think?
That's an excellent question. So we've seen a lot of interest in a lot of segments, probably none more so than retail, as retailers expand their retail media networks into in-store, and EV, as the transportation infrastructure gradually changes from gas to electric vehicles. The charging stations are looking for ways to communicate and other ways to monetize, and we're seeing a massive amount of interest in that space.
Okay. And Fiona, you did some work. I think you've done some studies and things on EV charging networks and things.
Yes, absolutely. So I wrote the Samsung strategy on EV charging, and it's something that we're taking forward next year. It is I completely agree with Adam. It is a really interesting sector And if we get the opportunity, we can start to talk about it in a little bit more depth, because it's very much different to the customer behavior, what that customer journey is that we need to align to what our advertisers want and what we can deliver. So I think that's a really interesting one. Again, without being too repetitious to Adam, I think retail is also an area that is really picking up. And I think the area there for retail is that from a customer point of view, the online and the offline purchasing journey coexists in one journey. For retailers, they look at it in two different sectors. So often they'll have a P&L that's online and a P&L that's offline. They have fantastic creative content on their online. None of that, or rarely, does that then replicate itself in store. And I think we're now starting to work with many retailers to kind of build that so the transition becomes quite seamless. One other area I think that's going to really develop is, I think, the measurement of out of home. That's another area that has still got a way to go. We've made leaps over the last 2 to 3 years, but I think there are still some really big opportunities to bring that standardization to out of home measurement.
Okay, we'll talk about measurement in a second. Autumn, it's great having. I hope I'm not doing you a disservice by saying you're a media buyer. You're one of the people we love having on our panels and our conferences, because you're the one who buys this media. You know, without you, we wouldn't have an industry. But you've been buying, I think, both retail networks and electric vehicle charging networks, which is probably quite unique in our industry.
We have, and they've proven themselves out, especially the EV charging stations. It's already made itself like a steady state on our plans for some of our CPG clients, because it makes sense. Like to Fiona's point, the messaging has been fairly disparate at times, given the different channels. But now that there's more in digital, we can kind of control that message, and it's following the consumer along their journey, wherever they are. If they're at an EV charging station, maybe it's like, all right, what are you doing for dinner? Maybe you need a bottle of wine, or maybe you need to pack bottles of water for your picnic tomorrow. And it's like, okay, now I can point you to a Walgreens or a Target or a liquor store or whatever down the street so that you can prepare for that. So I can have a consistent message that's also going to direct from an EV charging station potentially to a retailer, and I can use the retailer data to like determine whether or not my product's in stock there, so I know which one to send them to. So it's really evolved, and it's very impressive.
Mm-hmm. Now, I guess
Autumn, you oh, sorry, Adrian. I was just gonna say, Autumn, you sort of touched on the idea that these things are really related. I would say more than half of the conversations that we're having with EV charging companies are related to retail, and that continuous journey that Fiona mentioned of taking like their in-store experience and moving it outdoor, and taking their digital experience and layering it on top of all of it, because that's where most of these digital charging stations EV charging stations are going, right? They're going in retail parking lots a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say, thanks for bringing that up, Adam. I was going to say in the UK, of course, Fiona knows we have GridServe, because we've both done some conferences and things with GridServe. In the US, of course, Volta is probably the big one. But Broadsign have loads of. I was surprised that not surprised that Broadsign had lots of customers, but surprised that there were lots of EV customers in Europe. I think we had 3 or 4 of them at our AdTech conference in Amsterdam a couple of weeks ago. A Broadsign customer called Revolt did the keynote. You've got Charge Europe, which is a Polish-based network, and there's a few others in continental Europe as well, which is quite exciting. Will there be some consolidation? Are we going to see more, or are we going to see less EV charging networks, do you think, around the world?
Shall I run in there? I think all our markets are very different, and I think that's something we've got to. Even though we're talking globally, we have a very different geographical deployment of EV. So EV charging. So if you look at the UK, for example, the Climate Control Committee said we needed 325,000 public charging units in by 32. We currently have 36,000. So there's a big way to go. And of those 36,000, they're only in 22,000 locations. So there is a real disproportionate amount of those EV charging in London and the Southeast. And if you think against, in comparison to our other panelists here, we're a very small island. So that issue starts to make EV charging quite elitist, because we're London South East. Those that need public charging units are either on long journeys or don't have driveways, off-street parking, etc., etc. So that's becoming a really big margin. So the whole point about commercialization, just to take it right back to its basics, I know I'm not specifically answering your question, Adrian, sorry, but the point about commercialization is that second revenue stream for the COPs, and that's the charging companies, means that they have revenues coming in and greater opportunity to deploy more units and get a much bigger balance. So Volta is a great example, where they have a 55-inch screen within those units, and through that ad revenue, there is no cost to boroughs, landlords, etc., etc. And that suddenly changes the game. What we need to understand is that that revenue stream still has to serve the advertiser. And that's a real key thing. So if you've got a grid serve that is a forecourt in its own right and has hospitality, cafes, etc., that's one thing. If you had charging units in existing petrol gas stations, it's an in and an out. So very different customer behaviours that I think is key to the success in driving EV charging as a commercial enterprise.
Right. Okay. Adam, you had something to add to that, I think?
Yeah, Fiona just touched on the Volta model where everything is supported by ads. As we talk to different EV charging companies, we do see them sort of splitting between the idea of, I want to use advertising as an adjunct revenue stream, like my core business is still going to be selling electrons to EV drivers, and others who say, no, I want to be an ad company with an EV charger attached. I think it's too early to say which is going to work. I think it's going to be really interesting to see a lot of these companies try to run an out-of-home company where each individual piece of effectively street furniture is now like several $100,000 more expensive than a regular one, right? But we have seen a lot of interest in that inventory, and I think the viability will ultimately be determined by Autumn and her colleagues.
Right.
Yes,
well,
I've made the decision.
Okay. Also, you're in Southern California. I think you're in LA.
Yeah.
You've only got 10 years or so before you won't be having any fossil-based cars anymore, I guess.
That's right. California just passed some legislation that by 2035, I think it is, all cars must be electric. So when you talk about consolidation in EV, I don't know if that's what we'll see here. We might get even more disparate companies popping up with maybe a different revenue model. We'll see.
Right. Well, I think we're spot on here. We had a couple of not questions, but people supporting the fact that EV charging stuff is going to be big. Has to be if that's the way the governments want us to go. I'm guessing. I think we know that. Just to your point, Adam, I can't remember if Adam or Fiona said it about the link between retail and EV. We had a big announcement this week, Fiona, where Marks and Spencer's had appointed BP Pulse. BP is British. We call it. I'm old enough to know it is British Petroleum, but it's BP now. And BP Pulse is their EV charging arm, and they're going to roll out something like 600 or 700 BP Pulses at Marks and Spencer's, which is a big retail, like a mini Walmart, like a 7-Eleven. I think Marks and Spencer's.
It's really interesting, that side. So I've worked, as you know, with those that are authentic renewable energy. They have their own solar farms. If you take a grid serve, which you mentioned, or in the UK we have Instavolt, and we have many, many more. Then on the other side, we have Hotpoint, for example, which is owned by EDF. We obviously have the big oil and petrol companies, which are transitioning to include EV. Now, in the UK, you won't be able to buy a new petrol car in 8 years, but you will still have a multitude, thousands of petrol cars still on the road. So it's not, they're no longer going to be on the roads. So they're trying to do a balance. So we do have many more companies deploying EV charging, even if they're petrol or from their original businesses, or gas from their original businesses, but the two are quite divided. So from a commercial network point of view, where you would look at out of home as a broadcast network and go, great, they've got screens in units, can do a campaign across all of them. Those who are from sustainable renewable energy said, no, we will be in a network of our own. We don't want to be in a network with gas and petrol as their foremost business. So it's quite interesting seeing where they're coming from at the moment. But consolidation will inevitably start to merge that and blur the water. We will see. We don't know yet.
Okay. Well, certainly interesting times for EV then. In terms of retail, I mean, most people, I can say most people, that's wrong. Most people my age will remember Tesco TV or Walmart 2.0 or even Walmart 1.0. Retail media networks are a little bit different to that these days. I think we're talking about, screens in windows and convenience store networks. We actually have a question from one of our attendees, which I think links to this, which is a question for Autumn specifically. How important are extended dwell times in the digital out-of-home space? So something longer than, say, 40 seconds. I'm assuming if you drive past a billboard or walk past a bus shelter, it's less than 40 seconds. Fiona would know that for definite. But does retail give you an extended dwell time? And is that particularly important for you as a media buyer?
Well, it is important, but I don't know if it's necessarily extended that dwell time that makes it special. It's more that it's almost the point of sale. It's like, here's another thing. If I am on the screen of a cooler door and someone's trying to decide between Corona or Budweiser, I want to make sure that I am there reminding them how delicious Corona is with the lime. So the closer we are to point of sale, the better it is, as that, reminder of what they want to do. And also we love the retail networks. Like, the information we can get is amazing because we can actually tie things back to sales directly, which is interesting, and to inventory. So we've been doing a lot of testing.
So tying it to inventory is interesting. So you wouldn't necessarily want to advertise something that the retail did not have in stock, I'm assuming.
Right, because that would be very frustrating. If you get someone all excited about trying a new Corona seltzer and then you can't find it anywhere, that's not a good user experience.
And you've used the cooler screens as well. I've seen them heavily. I see not heavily advertised. I've seen heavy PR from them. It looks very clever. It's good that you're using them. That's very interesting. And you found them good. Okay, so just on retail, one more question I think we've got, which I'm just looking up here. Okay, so one question is from an audience member. Then I won't say who it is. Do retailers know what they have? Maybe a question for Adam. Do retailers really know what they have available when they can do this? Are they missing something, or are we missing something as an industry?
Yeah, I think some of them do. I think increasingly as an industry, retailers are starting to understand it as the digital ecosystem changes, and a lot of brands who are relying on that ecosystem for their connection to a user start to realize that their only connection out to consumers or regular citizens, or their most reliable collection, might come through their retail channel partners. And I think the retailers got this with their online RMNs, which for the most part are like advertising on their website and then chasing those users around the internet. I really think as they start to recognize that their in-store experience, if they link that with their online experience so that there's one continuous ad flow, I think there's a possibility for retailers to completely change the way we delineate above the line versus below the line marketing spend. Like Fiona was saying, we have these like two totally different experiences right now, and the possibility of ending that and just having like one seamless user experience from like the first time you hear about a brand in TV or online or whatever, all the way through to when you're in store picking up that Corona and getting a bag of limes, as Autumn was saying, to make that one contiguous experience. And they're the only ones who can do that, right? Like there's no other medium, there's no other channel that has the potential to make that happen. And so I think some of them really get it, particularly those who are more savvy within their online RMNs. They've started to wake up to, oh, we're a lot more powerful than just like a sales channel.
I'm just going to add to that, Adam, if that's all right, Adrian. What I think is really interesting is obviously retail covers a plethora of opportunities. So you've obviously got your FMCG, then you go through to fashion, you've got home, you've got, so the, you know, retail as an umbrella vertical houses so much. If you take, if you look at things like fashion, for example, and which is, you know, if you look at just the malls that we have across the globe, whether it's a Westfield or whatever it may be, and you take some examples of a particular retailer and what their social content is, which is full of videos beautifully shot. Every Thursday, think, for example, Zara drops their, in the UK, Zara drops their new lines. They're all, again, beautifully shot. There's video, there's content, there's stories. And then you go in store, Zara's probably not the best example of that, but you go in store, and in the UK, most of the screens are going to be behind the tills. So much of that content is covered up or disrupted because you've got the salespeople there or the till people there. So there is a real opportunity to take the content that already exists and again, carry that story through, have screens within the store in good placement that continues that journey, and opportunities to partner with other areas within retail that complement what you do. You don't necessarily manufacture, but you can also start to sell. So there are real opportunities through digital signage in retailers.
I agree with that. So not just the it's not just the CPG brands. We have a lot of entertainment brands too, and it could be like, oh, maybe I'm in the market and I'm picking up some popcorn. It's like, oh, maybe you should eat that popcorn while you're watching this movie or this TV show. There's a lot of opportunity across verticals. It doesn't actually have to be endemic. So very good point.
Thank you for that, Fiona. Now, I'm going to ask, we've got a couple of questions. I'm only going to take one at the moment, but I'm going to get to every question that comes in. We've got a few queued up. There's a couple of hundred people on the call so far. So there should be more questions, because if you think of the balance of having 300 people on the call and only having 5 or 6 questions here, but so keep them coming in. This is a good opportunity to ask Autumn, Fiona and Adam, pretty much anything you like, within reason, of course. Don't talk about Adam's background and his Christmas tree or the color of Fiona's jumper. But one question we've got, which is topical, a little bit off of out of our order of retail media networks. Have any panelists, I don't know whether Adam would have seen this, but maybe Autumn and Fiona, has any panelist seen any sort of upswing in out of home since I'm going to say the person here has written Twitter fiasco, but probably not a good idea for me to say Twitter fiasco, but we all know since Elon Musk took over Twitter, the debacle or the whatever it is, have we seen anything happening in the out of home space? Has money come from social media campaigns that would have been on Twitter into our space? Autumn?
Not from our side. Typically would just shift into a different social channel. Like we use social very specifically because it's efficient. It's a very one-to-one messaging forum for us. So we haven't put any into out of home.
Okay. Fiona?
I think it's a really interesting question. And I think, if anything, it's kind of thrown up the opportunity for people to look at things in all different media channels in new eye. So you've had what's reported. So allegedly, half of Twitter's top advertisers have paused, gone on hold, from General Motors to L'Oreal. So big brands, big names, Audi, VW, and the big guys have put that on pause. And it's just to go back that the concern is the less policing through resources and the overall approach for misinformation. Now, inevitably, there are a plethora of channels that people can move their money into. But again, you still have, is there an opportunity within other platforms for misinformation or whatever it is that's the concern? If there was one channel that doesn't have misinformation because it doesn't have content in that regard, it's out of home. So maybe not yet, but I certainly think there is an opportunity for out of home. And one thing I rarely talk about is actually the sector. It's got to be for advertisers. But if there's one channel for advertisers where they are not going to get caught up in a misinformation or something that they're not happy about, it's where there isn't any content, but there's context. So there is the real opportunity for looking at your media from a point of context with your creative and not even have to think about, am I in an environment where there is a negative pull that I am supporting? So out of home, working with their advertisers, working with the clients, have a really strong case to put forward to have an element of that budget diverted into out of home pockets. That's my thoughts anyway. Okay,
we have a question. I'm just, again, if you're watching this webinar and you put a question in, I'm not necessarily taking them in the order of coming in. I'm just trying to link them to the topic at the moment. One question we had, which links to what you've just been saying, Fiona, is what is the best strategy to shift spend from online or digital display to digital out of home? Is there a strategy laid out? I mean, I know that the DPAA are doing great work in getting more and more advertising money into the space, but is there a good strategy for this? And maybe Autumn, you could add something to that as well. You spend money in omni-channel all over the place, but what should the digital out of home industry be doing better, perhaps? Maybe this comes back to your question of measurement, Fiona, but what should the digital out of home industry be doing better to get more, to shift the money or to get bigger market share from online?
I would have to say it needs to continue to be more connected. So the more touch points I can connect together to tell that story for the consumer, then the better. So the information that I'm getting back from the EV charging networks or the retail networks, so that I can connect the dots, the easier it is for me to increase the size of my out-of-home budgets to make sure I'm capturing that consumer everywhere. And also being able to then retarget them, right? So if they've been in the vicinity of somewhere where we've shown them a message, we want to then also be able to connect with them again on their phone at a different time to remind them how much they enjoyed whatever it is they got from us.
Right, good. That's a good answer. That's great advice there, I think. We were talking about, I'm going to go back to EV now. I'm sorry to jumping around, but we do have another question from somebody. I think they might be in Spain, but I'm just guessing by the surname, which is probably not a good thing to do. But hey, look, I'm white, middle-aged, I can get away with that. How big is it's allowed? How big? I'm not saying who it is. Just it looks like they're in Spain.
What's the question?
Yeah. Focus on the point. Yeah, when you dig a hole, don't keep digging. Correct.
Yeah, dig up, dude. Dig up.
Yeah, that's good. We can edit that out later on. Oh no, it's live. Darn it. Right. How big? Oh, they've said they're based in New York. Darn. Well, there's a big Latin American community in New York. I'll dig the hole further. Right. The question is, how big is digital out of home in smart city projects around the world? Adam, you're global VP of strategy. You must see some of this. Is there's a second part to the question. So how big is it? I noticed that when you go to smart city expos and smart city conferences around the world, they don't seem to know what digital out of home is. I always think that's a missing opportunity myself. So I can answer that a little bit. I've been to so many smart city expos and they spend most of the time talking about trash or refuse, waste collection and, solar panels. They don't talk about digital. That's the first question. But the one, is there a viable revenue model through smart city applications?
It's an excellent question. Yeah, I agree. Most smart city practitioners, let's call them, or smart city advocates are usually focused on like data collection and action and not so much communication with the citizens of said smart city. We saw a ton of interest, call it 3-4 years ago, from smart city. And if you right off the bat, you asked like, what were the hot verticals? I might have said smart city then because we got so many inquiries. A lot of that has calmed down. I think partly because the people who are looking at smart cities are turning to run-of-the-mill digital out-of-home media owners. When I say run-of-the-mill, I mean like, pure play digital out-of-home media vendors to do that part for them. They're recognizing that, okay, this is an industry that has its own professionals, its own industry standards, its own best practices, and its own economies of scale. And it's better for me as a smart city implementer to partner with someone. I think that absolutely there are viable revenue models like that. The most common one is just street furniture, right? You see that particularly in the UK, London. JC&Co has a ton of street furniture around the city, and you see it in a lot of others. New York with the Link NYC project from Intersection. So there's definitely a viable revenue model there. I think more of a question is around what is the viable communication model, right? Not just is there a model to put up screens and make money, that's kind of obviously true, but how are you weaving that into the fabric of your smart city strategy to actually make it a viable communications medium, and maybe actually put some content on it, to Fiona's point, so that it's more than just advertising? Because otherwise it's, I would say any city that has digital street furniture could be seen as being a smart city, where someone is taking data and using it to communicate. That communication is mostly commercially based. It's mostly advertising. And I think the line comes between just like a digital street furniture installation and a smart city installation, when that data and that communication is not just commercial, when it starts to become civic, when the city government is using it as well.
Yeah. Okay. That's a very good point. I do think, and just going back to my point about the smart city events around the world, they don't seem to be seeing what we've been doing for 20 years. When you think that JCDecaux invented street furniture and the bike racks and and the toilet, the washrooms, the toilets and things. We've been doing civic duty for a long time. I want to go back. I wanted to go back to Fiona's point at the very beginning of the webinar about measurement. We had one comment, one wasn't a question, comment said, "Oh, I thought we were doing measurement quite well." And I would have thought from the outside, we are doing measurement quite well. So there's a question there, are we? But another question's come in, which is a true question. What are some of the biggest challenges in the measurement area? Are you, Fiona, thinking about attribution?
Absolutely, spot on. So whoever made the note about doing, are we doing measurement well? We are. If you think over the last, I could almost say the last 5 years, if not 3 years, the measurement and standardization, which is a big thing across the globe, and we all have our different measurement auditing companies, has kind of really accelerated. So yes, we are doing it well. We're doing it better. We're certainly doing it better. We still have, as technology comes through and allows greater targeting, more niche, the opportunity to be more contextual, that also needs to have measurement attached to it. So we will still need to expand and further develop all of the measurement that we do. And attribution, so measurement linked to business outcome, is the real way to push out of home forward even more. It will be, as technology moves forward, measurement will need to move forward with it. We can't stop where we are now and go, oh, we're okay now, because the technology is moving. So we need to keep pace with it. The business outcome has always been the big thing for out of home. Now, in a lot of areas, if you think of the currency that everybody uses in the UK, in olden days, it was root, and the media owners would always have a little bit of a back and forth of whether they felt their particular channel was being measured correctly. It was a currency. So the measurement tools that we used previously was a negotiation currency, and that was the standardization. Whether that was accurate or not became a little bit irrelevant. It was the currency we traded on. We've now moved leaps forward, but we've still got an out of home on an econometrics basis, always kind of fell short. But now it's that, right, what's the next leap to go business outcome, attribution? Can we, other than EPOS data, straightforward point of sale, how do we relate that back immediately, rather than doing, test research, having control and test and all that, which is not what we want to be able to link it. It will come.
Autumn is vigorously nodding her head, big smile. Obviously, it's something she needs for her clients.
It is. And, I think the retail networks are going to bring a certain portion of that, right? Especially for CPG or anything that can be marketed and purchased right wherever they are. But there does need to be a connection to business outcomes. And as we have developed, which I definitely think that the out-of-home space has grown greatly in the measurement, on the measurement side of things, I am concerned about the legislation as it changes and privacy concerns, and as they start limiting the things that we can collect, whether it become an IP address or a device ID, it's going to start limiting us again. But it's limiting us as a whole in the industry, not just out of home. So it's like now trying to find other ways to get that information so that we can do the attribution back to the business outcomes, which is key.
Right. Adam, as a SVP strategy at Broadsign, you must be looking at all the different companies that keep popping up, offering either new companies. We had a couple of new startups in Europe recently come to our conference, but we've had probably more companies taking the data that they own now and selling it into the out-of-home space. You must have seen a lot of that as well.
Yeah, I think we've, over the course of the last 4 years, I think we've spoken to something like 80 data companies.
80. 80.
Yeah, 80 on our team. I have a bit of a different view on how we're doing measurement in out of home. I agree with Fiona that we're getting better. I think there are people in out of home and regions and countries that are doing it really well. There are like segments of the out of home space because it tends to get subdivided between outdoor and indoor, et cetera. I don't think as an industry we're doing a good enough job because it's not consistent. Like, we can't come as an industry to Autumn and say, here's 10 million impressions spread across a continent in different contexts, and you're going to be measuring apples to apples to apples. We can't do that. We could, I think, in theory, and we're on our way, but we're not there yet. And I think that a lot of the things that are underpinning the recent progress are threatened, as Autumn said, by legislation, by just a changing of societal attitudes towards, digital tracking. Like, are these devices utility devices or tracking devices that we all carry around with us? And so I think that actually measurement is going to be a bigger conversation in the coming, call it 3 to 5 years, than maybe all of us had hoped. I think we sort of saw this light at the end of the tunnel that we were all going to standardize on mobile derived SDK data and sort of harmonize our measurement across the board. And I actually am not convinced that that is going to be such a sure bet over the coming years. I think there's a lot more work to do there.
Okay, interesting. Well, great input there. Thank you. We did ask people who registered to give us questions in advance. We had a couple of those. One of those, and so the panel have been prepared for this one because you sent us this question when you registered. I'm going to ask, is the climate cost of digital billboards too high to justify? So, a sustainability question. There was obviously a recent Drum report on emissions, which I think we've all had a chance to look at. So I'll start with you, Adam. Is the climate cost of digital billboards too high to justify?
I think the answer to that is no, but also, like, it depends, right? It depends on what you're doing with that billboard, what you're doing, where it is, how it's powered, what kind of campaign it's running. I think that it's maybe not unreasonable or unfair, but I think it's limiting to just ask that of one medium. I think you got to ask that question of your TV campaign, right? Like, if you're running an ad against a big TV show with a $80 million production budget, your carbon impact isn't just your ad. It's also that show, right? Because that show, it's how the ad gets conveyed to the audience. So I think we're seeing the industry ask this of all media, of all communications, and of everything. We started off talking about EV. We're transitioning to EVs not just because we love the neck snapping acceleration, but because, although that is fun, but because we love because we're concerned about the environmental impact. And I think that we as an industry need to hear that and answer those questions. So there's a lot of data out there that shows that out of home and digital out of home are actually, on a per impression basis, very competitive or even better than most other media. There's other data that shows it the other way around. I don't think that we have a good handle on it yet, but I do think that we as an industry need to take that seriously to investigate that. And if the answer turns out to be, wow, we have a bigger impact than we're comfortable with, we need to take steps immediately to change that.
And I guess also it would also affect how how you buy or where you want to place your adverts, I guess.
Absolutely. So sustainability is like the new year of mobile. It's what everyone is concerned with now. It's a very hot topic. It's showing up in our RFPs from clients. So we are definitely moving in a very fast pace towards making sure our digital media is sustainable. There are quite a few partners out there now. I have one partner that comes to me and it's like, I can tell you the sustainability score for an entire company, say maybe it's Google or it's Meta or whatever it is, based on their self-reported data to the government. And you can decide whether or not you want to work with them based on how sustainable they are as a company, not just the media. And then I have another partner that measures the media itself. And it's like, okay, your asset size are impacting this, or the site that you're running on is very heavy and a big drain on, the CPUs and the computer. So there's different ways to measure it, and there's different ways to decide how you want to go to market. We're also working on a private marketplace of supply partners that have carved out very sustainable media and are guaranteeing certain efficiencies with it in terms of the carbon footprint. So we're leaning into it, but there's a lot of different methodologies and some inconsistencies, like Adam said. So it's important to dig deep and understand, all right, where's the data coming from? How are you looking at it? So if you do have to use multiple data sources, you understand what the commonality is.
That sounds very difficult. I like the idea of the private marketplace. That sounds good. Fiona, I'm guessing, I mean, your business does loads of briefs and things. How high up on a brief these days is sustainability?
Oh yeah, I mean, if you go back kind of a short period of time, sustainability was way down the kind of menu of priority. It's now right at the very top, and rightly so, which is absolutely fantastic. I think there are several things here. I think from a media perspective, from a consumer viewpoint, out of home is an easier target for criticism because it is physically there for somebody to see and question. So I think there's that. I agree with Adam. I think the industry as a sector has really taken the responsibilities of carbon footprint and offsetting that in innovative ways really seriously. I think many of them are looking at suppliers when they're looking at creating digital networks or expanding them or upgrading them. They're looking at their suppliers and they're looking at their sustainability first and foremost. I think they're looking at the overall supply chain. So I think that's really important. So I do think there is a real drive from the media owners. I think they're taking that seriously, as I say. I think one of the things you need to consider, and Adam kind of talked about it, is we are a one-to-many. So if you balance our one-to-many advertising broadcast to a one-to-one, we are actually quite low down the list of our performance in as far as we are doing quite well. And the other thing, if you think of paper, posters in previous life, our skins, paper and paste, the physical fixing, distribution, driving to transportation, digital is taking over that space, and against that whole distribution and fixing is doing very well. So I think as an industry, it's taken it really responsibly, is very serious about it. I think the manufacturers, I work with quite a few of the big screen manufacturers, you've got Samsung, which I know, 100% renewable energy in 3 different countries now. They are focused on 100% renewable energies in several others where people are doing skins. They're recyclable now.
Yeah.
Vinyls is an issue. I think we spoke about this before, where, if you have vinyl usage, a lot of that goes to landfill. Replace vinyls with screens. There are lots of components. It's maybe not as black and white as people think it is.
Right. I think I received a press release, yesterday from LG, as we're talking about Samsung, one of the major competitors, head of CES, announcing that they're now in the top 10 of sustainable companies in the world, which is very, very good to read and interesting to read. Adam, have any agencies ever asked Broadsign if you can target based on emissions? Is that something that you could?
Yeah, we've had a few agencies start to. Most of them are starting with reporting, right? They want to know what is the impact. They're sort of answering the question that Autumn and Fiona and I have been mentioning, that this actually isn't that as easy as it seems to come to an answer. But the idea of optimizing based on it is definitely on their minds, and it's something that I'm sure we are going to see in the future.
Okay, it sounds like there's lots of challenges that Horizon and Autumn have that clever software or clever data could certainly come along and help. I didn't realize that your job was so difficult, Autumn.
I know.
I just thought you bought media. Now, as we approach the end of the year, obviously everywhere you'll get the top 10 or top 20 things of 2022. What's not just trends, but what's been happening, what's popular. So we can't really end the year without talking about 3D anamorphic content. So 3D anamorphic content, or as the Australians like to call it 3DOOH, 3DOOH, which I think is quite clever. And these are the 3D content things that jump out at you. Typically, you see them on Piccadilly Lights or in Times Square, or they're very popular in Seoul, Korea generally, and a lot in Asia. So these are the big things where you see a sneaker pop out of a shoe, or some celebrity come on the screen, or something come out and frighten you. So question here is 3D anamorphic a genuine innovation, and how excited about it are you, members of the panel? I'll start with Fiona, because I mentioned Piccadilly, and I know that's one of her favorite screens in the world.
Of course. Well, I mean, I love it. I think it looks great. I think you've just got to put it into context. So I think there have been some fantastic executions globally. I think we need to recognize that it is about the creative rather than the screen, but it has to be shot and developed for optimum viewing from one specific point. So as part of a bigger campaign, it's brilliant, but I think from a client perspective, they need to understand, and I'm sure they do, it's those deep screen creatives. Yes, you have an audience, but they are done for social sharing. So it is about making sure that how it's shot, what it looks like, is appropriate to be shared everywhere, because that's its purpose. Its purpose is not for the Piccadilly Circus audience. That's great, but its bigger purpose is that it goes from a viral perspective. So as long as they are done from a client, the investment in that production of it balances with a bigger campaign of other channels as well as out of home, then I'm all in. I think they look fantastic. I really do.
So when you say go viral, we're talking TikTok or Facebook, or as we talk about Twitter.
All of those platforms. That's the aim of them, in my view. That is the aim of them, is to really take that message and get that campaign moving. That's its point.
Okay. I think I'm going to come on to Adam in a second, because I want to talk to him about costs and some of the technical side of things, because it does always look costly. But also, when you presented at our conference a couple of weeks ago in LA, you talked about a great viral campaign that you did. This was it Amway? Is that the right?
Adway. So
Adway, sorry, ADWAY, Adway. These
right.
are the clever little projectors that you put onto the
rear
view
mirrors
mirrors,
of the car.
Car mirrors. So I'm trying to translate English to American. I don't know if you call them bonnets, boots, who knows. The mirrors you use on the car. And it presented a really good little image onto the side of the car. So there was no need for an LCD unit or anything on the top.
Right.
That was great, but that was a stunt, if you like. That was social media. That was all.
Well, I don't know. It was definitely an authentic way to show up at an activation. So our CPG client, Blue Triton, had just launched Action Water, which is like an alkaline water, a sports drink meant to rehydrate you. And some of their creative featured a quarterback from the University of California. So what we did, since we had the creative with him featured on it, we surrounded USC in downtown LA and also infiltrated the tailgates with the cars that showed the creative of Caleb Williams drinking action and representing it. And then while people are partying and drinking, they're handing out full-size bottles of water. So I mean, some of the comments we got back were like, oh my God, this is amazing. Everyone's drinking, they're handing us bottles of water for free. So, I mean, it's all about the time and the place, and it has to make sense. But the great thing about that is not only the impression it made and how it tied in very well with the activation overall, but we're able to collect all of the device IDs or Bluetooth IDs of those that were impacted or could have seen the spot, and then we're retargeting them. It's like, so as they're telling their friend next weekend.
That comes back to measurement and attribution. What would it take you to use 3D anamorphic for a campaign then? Would you rely on a client coming to you and saying, I've seen that in Times Square, I want something similar, or how would you go about that?
Well, I would probably defer to our traditional out-of-home buyers and say, what do you think? Does this make sense? Since it is a very stationary and activation, and I do feel like it depends on the strategy of the client. If it's an entertainment client that wants an impact, that wants to be buzzworthy, if it's driven by press or it involves talent, it makes complete sense to me. But just as a normal part of a campaign, do I think it would be a regular buy? Most likely not. And I know that they do increase the costs for that type of activation, whether it's required or not. So I'd have to determine, is it more beneficial than whatever I could do in other digital forums?
Right. So Adam, technically then, I think Fiona mentioned that you often need to stand in the right place to see this sort of stuff. I mean, is it costly? Is it particularly expensive? Is it difficult to do? And why should we do it?
So from a media perspective, no, because it's just a file playing on a screen, right? They're just videos. They tend to work best on angled screens or screens that are sort of wrap around a building. Those tend to be expensive locations, so that can be expensive. The unique and hard and theoretically expensive part of this is producing the creative, because it really is just an animation or a video file that's been bent like it's through a funhouse mirror in a very specific way to make it look like the perspective is if it coming out of the wall. And to do that, Fiona's right. You have to view them from one very specific location. So you have to go to that location, measure all of those angles. They have to be reasonably precise, and then through software skew the video according to those angles so that you're creating that perspective. So it's not necessarily expensive. It is very expensive on a per location or per ad play basis, because each video file you're creating is bespoke to that location where it's playing. So that's the big difficulty in these, is that it's a lot of work to play an ad in one location. So to Fiona's point, it better go viral.
Yeah.
One other thing I would add to that is that from a digital perspective, if I'm looking at this, I would be like, well, why don't I just put a QR code on one of the billboards and then give that consumer an augmented reality experience that now with the different platforms that have the split screen experience, so you can see the augmented reality, you can see the consumer, and then they're more likely to share it because they're involved in the execution.
Okay.
There are other ways to get there, but these are cool.
Yeah. Well, who would have thought we'd be talking about QR codes in 2020, eh?
Thank you, COVID.
You have to thank COVID for something. Yeah, QR code, great. I think there's a whole comedy skit we could do on QR codes and COVID, but we won't go there. We've had quite a few questions from our audience today because they didn't necessarily know we were going to talk about it. It was a question that was presented to our panel last week when somebody registered, and that's the M word. I'm going to have to say it, but I did say, I've said many times before publicly, I was at a Zoomtopia conference in San Jose a couple of weeks ago. Actually, the week after we were in LA together, Autumn. And the guy on the stage refused to mention the M word. He just put the big letter M up and said, look, you all know what I'm talking about, but I'm not going to use the word. But I'm going to have to. The metaverse. What do we think about the metaverse in terms of us? Adam, Adam's got the funniest look on his face. I'll start with Adam. It's like at school. You get picked on. You sit in the front row.
It's Adam's favourite subject.
Is it? Oh dear. Okay, here we go then.
I will preface this with I am potentially wrong about this, maybe even likely wrong. Ask my wife and kids. I'm wrong about a lot of things. But in my opinion, the metaverse is Mark Zuckerberg and 300 sycophantic Meta employees engaging in a collective technical delusion, right? This is Second Life with goggles on. It didn't work then. Why do we think that we're all going to be existing in the metaverse now just because Zuckerberg made this one? Like, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'll be eating my words and we'll all be working in the metaverse as legless phantasms 5 years from now. But I just don't see it. And even if that happens, I think that I don't know where the space is for out-of-home companies. Like, what are the odds that Meta, an ad-supported company that is not doing brilliantly right now from a revenue perspective, is going to tell Outfront or Deco or Branded Cities or Broadsign, hey, why don't you guys take care of the ads inside the metaverse? Like, there's a 0% chance of that. I think that's just,
Okay.
I think it's a non-issue. At least in our space.
So that's great. So, but also, I mean, you must have looked at it. It's one of your omni-channel touch points, I guess, the metaverse.
I've looked at it multiple times in my career as it's come up. I mean, I remember buying Toyota ads in Second Life. So this isn't new. It's just a different version of it, right? And to Adam's point, there's still out of home within the metaverse. It's just not sold to us through an out of home company. I'm being approached constantly. Do you want to buy a stadium sponsorship within a game, or do you want to have these billboards? It's just like as if you were in a real stadium or driving down a road if it's a racing car, whatever it is. So it's funny. It can be very we can just wind up in a large inception spiral of like, is it out of home or is it metaverse? What do we do with this?
Well, yeah, it's one-to-one like that. That's the other thing. Like, we could all be in the same metaverse stadium, seeing different ads for based on our interests. Like, that's kind of the interesting possibility of advertising in the metaverse. So that's like, it doesn't trade on any of the things or any of the technology or really any of the experience that the out-of-home industry has.
No.
It's like saying that a print ad on the overleaf page of like a mountainscape is out of home because look, it's next to a virtual version of the outside. I'm like, no, that's not out of home.
Well, I don't want to stroke your ego, Adam. So there's two things. Your wife's just come online and said you're always wrong.
Yeah, no, I'm probably wrong.
But our friend in New York, who I accused of being Spanish, I think, which I apologize for, has said, Adam, that is the most succinct description of the metaverse I have ever heard.
Great.
So you should probably trademark that. So Adam's wife, as she's online now, he gets it right sometimes, but it's mainly to do with technology, not obviously around the house. Right, we're finishing up. We've got one last question actually. Yes, one last question, and it's a good one actually to end on. So thank you for posting it. What are each individual panelist most looking forward to in 2023? I'll start with Autumn, because I know that she's going skiing and she can just say, well, I'm going skiing in 2023. So
yes, actually, that is what I'm looking forward to the most.
Well, when you finish skiing, what's the most thing you're looking forward to in 2023 from the out of home?
That's a tricky thing to answer. I think just as it continues to evolve, as we continue to get more and more companies are realizing they're sitting on a ton of first party data that they're trying to make available. So the more access we get to that is very interesting, given the limitations that legislation is going to continue to throw at us constantly. So seeing how we evolve in that perspective is going to be very interesting. And just what new and different creative executions, like we mentioned the adway, the projection on the side of the car. Like, wow, that's cool. Yeah. Who would have thought of that versus the signs on top? Like, what else are we going to see? What other executions are going to be come up with?
Okay, Fiona?
I agree with Autumn. It's quite a difficult question. We've talked about where we see the future with EV and retail and measurement, etc., which is great. For me, I think it's not necessarily what I look forward to, but what I'm hoping to do more of is talk to advertisers. My heart sits with, let's talk to advertisers and get back to talking about where is the value with out of home? What's fantastic about out of home? What is the adoption of new technologies? How is that pushed through with out of home? Twitter, as we talked about earlier, no misinformation concerns here. You know, let's get back to really having these kind of conversations, which are great, but in front of a whole room of clients. That's where I think we really need to be focusing.
Mm-hmm. Good. And Adam?
I think I'm most excited to see what happens in the retail and EV space from an external perspective. Selfishly, internally, we've spent the last year working on a whole bunch of things within our company, and I'm really excited to see those launch. It's, you know, always great to see the culmination of a lot of hard work of a lot of great people hit the market. But externally, I'm really excited about retail and EV.
Brilliant. Okay, well, that's a fantastic way to end. I'd like to thank all of our panelists today for spending the last hour with us. Hopefully had a lot of fun. Even Adam's jumper was quite palatable in the end. Help with the backdrop. It certainly dates the video, so we know when we recorded it, that's for sure. And I'd like to thank all the people. We had a couple of hundred people on the call. I'd like to thank you all for staying to the end. One person, I can't see their name now because it scrolled through the list of questions we had, asked how they could contact the panelists. We can give you that information later on. They also asked
or LinkedIn. LinkedIn
is a good way. That's a good one.
LinkedIn's a great way.
LinkedIn's a good way.
It's there for
on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And where they should network in the out of home space. I know that Broadsign will be in Barcelona, ISE, January 31st and February the 3rd.
We will.
And you'll find me all around the world in the 2023. We're in Singapore, we're in Miami, we're in New York, Amsterdam, Sydney, and I've forgotten 2 others as well, I think. But you'll find Broadsign and ourselves at most of those places. And also, I hope to see you again in LA or Las Vegas next time we do a conference on the West Coast. And Fiona, we'll see you in London or sometime in the next couple of months. So thank you, everybody. We're going to sign off now. Thank you all.